Tim Petrowich for Dateline Marion, and as usual on this afternoon, our guest is Marion head football coach Kerry Martin. And we have to talk about the bad with the good, and so we're going to kick things off by talking about last week's game, a 49-14 loss to a very, very good Highland team. I think that's where I want to start because we knew Highland was pretty good going in. You had talked about comparisons to previous teams like Metamora, Sacred Heart Griffin, things like that, and they really looked the part last Friday night.
Yeah, they did, and it's one of those situations where you can't start the way we started. We throw an interception early in the opening drive, and then we fumble late on a very productive drive and end up losing the ball on the 7-yard line. And when you play a team like Highland, in order to beat them, two things have to happen. You've got to play at a very high level, no turnovers, limited mistakes, and play maybe your best game. They need to play below their normal abilities. You need to have them make some turnovers, make some mistakes. And neither of those two things happened. I don't, you look back, you wonder what you did wrong in preparation. We had a decent week of practice. There were no, we made some key mistakes. And as I always say to you, sometimes when you make mistakes, you blame yourself, but sometimes good teams make you make mistakes. And their defensive end did a nice job of playing off a block, and it's just a throw we'd like to have back, but those things happened, and the fumble was not, they mainly stripped it from our ball player, and those two things got us off to a bad start, but our kids battled and got back on the board and down 21-7 at halftime, and we just had to play catch up, and that kind of gets you out of your game plan. And when you get out of your game plan, you have to do some things you wouldn't normally do, and maybe press a little bit. So just one of those things. They're a really good football team that we didn't play our best game against, and we needed to win that game.
We talked last week about the string they had of consecutive regular season wins,
right,
and how good they were last year. And I felt like this team that you played last Friday night was even better than last year's team that made it all the way to the Class 4A semifinals.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that. I think the quarterback last year was more highly touted, and maybe that's the one area where they were better as far as just a pure passer. But I'll tell you what, kid threw the ball pretty well. So I don't know. It is tough to compare because we're a little bit different team than last year, but I certainly think they're as good. Certainly they're as good as last year's team.
And we talked also about Laporta, the receiver, and right off the bat they put the ball in his hands on a running play. So they made it known they wanted to get him the ball, and they did it in a few different ways. But he is so good, especially when he gets the ball in the open field, making people miss. He's not going to run away from you, but he is going to make you miss, and he does a really good job at that.
He does. He's a great athlete. I understand he's a great kid. He's a great student. Getting looks from Yale and Central Michigan and a lot of really good schools. And they did. And then I think you and I had talked about this, or I had talked to someone in the press about they didn't feel like their game against Marion last year was their best game. They felt like that was one of their worst games, especially the regular season. And I think they came out on a mission to rectify that against us. If they didn't look past the Wildcats this time. They really came to play. You could tell before the game they were stoked and they were ready and they were focused. And I think you're right. I think they sent a message early by getting the ball in Sam's hands, and boy, he can do some things. He's just a great high school football player.
So these are the types of games where you can go back and you can take a look at the film, and even though maybe you didn't do things necessarily wrong, maybe as you mentioned Friday night, they were clearly a better team. But there's obviously some places you can look at the film and see there's some things that you can do now to make your team even that much better.
Yeah, there's always room for growth. There's always room for change, and there's always room for improvement. And we know, looking at the film, that there were things we could have done a better job of. There's things I could have done a better job as coach with, and players could have executed better, and I could have prepared them better. And I don't think they're 49-14 better than us, but I think they're probably two touchdown team better than us on a consistent basis. Last year we played them in a much closer, more competitive game. That's what I was hoping for this year, to be in the game late with a chance to win it. And we were out of this game early. 21-7.5 wasn't too bad, but then they pull away in the third quarter. And I thought they elevated in the third quarter.
Yeah.
I really think they separated from us in the third quarter. And it's not a shock to sit here and tell you that they're a better football team than us. Teams that are better than you, that doesn't mean they can't be beat. As I said earlier, it just means you've got to play at a higher level, and you need them to make some mistakes if you're going to win the game. And neither of those two things happened. We didn't play our best game. We needed more of a Rochelle performance than what we did. We needed them to make some mistakes, and they did not make hardly any mistakes. I think there were very few penalties, very few turnovers. I mean, they just played a really solid game, getting the ball to the right people, making some key throws, and the results were what it was. But a lot to learn from it. I think our kids, leave the ball game. We talked about it. We were down about it, but I told them they've got to leave that in the Highland locker room, because we've got games to play and games to win, and we've got to change our focus now to the conference and try to go out and defend our conference title.
And the one thing, if you look at the stats and look at the box score, like you have in previous games, you put the ball in a lot of different people's hands, and from that perspective, you didn't really change things up. You may have changed the types of plays you called, but you still were using everybody on the field at different times.
We did. We had a lot of guys carry the ball, and a lot of guys get involved in the action, and there were some real positive things. There were 2 or 3 really good drives. I mean, the drive that we fumbled on at the beginning of the game was a great drive, all the way down to the 7. We put together 2 other long physical drives that I think we were getting 5, 6 yard, 7 yard gains. We completed some key passes for some big yardage. Wyatt Fox had a nice catch. Cade Cruz had a nice catch. I mean, there were a lot of positive things. Our kids winning some battles up front throughout the game. It just wasn't consistent enough. Our defense made some plays and then gave up some big plays to a team that's going to make those plays against a lot of people this year. I think their conference, I think a lot of people believe their conference is a little bit down this year. I don't think they're down this year. I think looking at talking to coaches in that conference, I believe most of them feel like their teams are down except one, and that's the Highland Bulldogs.
Speaking of conference and speaking of maybe down or maybe a shift in who's at the top of the conference, and you open conference play with Cahokia, and typically year after year we hear the names Centralia over the last year, Centralia, Althoff, and Cahokia is one of those teams that's a wild card. I think this year maybe Cahokia is one of those teams that's expected to challenge, and they've started off pretty good, 2-1 with wins over Collinsville and previously undefeated Bethalto last week, and their only loss is to a pretty good Cardinal Ritter team out of St. Louis. So it's going to be a tough challenge to open the conference season Friday night.
It is. There are people that believe it's our toughest challenge, and I don't know that because I haven't seen everybody in the conference play, or I haven't seen anybody in the conference play, but I always feel like Cahokia is always one of the toughest challenges for us. I think they're well coached, they're very fast, they are very strong, they are the kind of team that creates a lot of problems for you because you can defend them well, but it only takes one missed tackle to allow a big play, and they like big plays, and they've always had a tradition of that. So it's a great challenge for us. Glad we got the game at home, but there's always a lot of excitement between us and the Comanches. There's always a lot of big plays and a lot of scoring, and a lot of times it goes right down to the wire. I mean, a lot of times it's gone down to the wire. So we expect that same way this year. I think it'll be a hard-fought ball game. And, we know that one game doesn't make a season, but we do know if we're going to win the conference or try to win the conference again, this is a pivotal game in that journey.
Now, Cahokia is one of the teams, and I did a little research. Their coach says they want to open things up and throw the ball down the field and go for the big strike, and they've definitely got the horses to do that. They're a very athletic team, but it starts with their quarterback, Malik Shaw, who came out of nowhere last year and had a really, really good year, and he was really effective against the Wildcats too. Really made it tough on the Wildcats in a game up at Cahokia last year, because not only can he throw the ball, but when a play breaks down, he's elusive enough to turn what could be a big loss or a broken play into big yardage.
Well, he can. You know, we beat him 35-32 a year ago, and it was a hard-fought battle.
Had to get an interception late to save the game. Yeah,
right to the end of the game. And I think the year before that we had a late rally here.
Beat him late. Yeah,
beat him late. So our last several years have been that way. And you're exactly right in your description of him. He's got a great arm. He can scramble. He can find. And last year, I remember Terrell Henderson chasing him all over the field for 4 quarters. And yeah, I mean, they bring a real challenge to us. It's an exciting challenge, but it's certainly they're going to bring the speed and the vertical game, and they're going to try to control that line of scrimmage and protect him, and then hopefully, if we do make good coverage or we do get a rush, they can turn him loose and he can scramble and find open receivers. He's a good quarterback.
And he is out of the mold. I think we talked about this last year a little bit because he kind of reminds you of a Javon Williams Jr., who is another one that has caused problems for a lot of teams, not just Marion. But again, the rest of that team, if you do contain him, there are other people who can cause problems as well.
Exactly, and that's the thing. It's not like it's kind of like the Highland situation where it isn't one person. You can't focus on just one, because when you do that, other guys can hurt you. So it's as I said, the game plan we've got is one we believe in, one believe it can work. We have to execute it, but we've got to stop the big play. We've got to stop that long vertical throw, that quick score, that scramble that gets out of trouble and able to complete a ball or run for big yardage. So our defense has to be disciplined again, as they've been challenged heavily the first few weeks with the Rochelle wing tee, with the flex bone of Jerseyville, with the high-powered offense of Highland, and now the speed and vertical threat of Cahokia. So our defense continues to get challenged, and what's interesting is they're getting challenged in different ways with different looks. So 4 weeks, 4 different schemes, and 4 good teams.
Now, one thing I think that there's been an Achilles heel for Cahokia over the last few years. It's been depth. They don't have the greatest numbers, so this is an opportunity, a challenge where the Wildcats can take advantage, because with the possible exception of last week against Highland, you've been able to wear the teams down that you played. Yeah,
well, that's part of it, and I wouldn't say that our depth is great, but it certainly is better than some of our opponents, and so that's something we could try to take advantage of. But we always tell the kids, when you play up tempo and you try to do those things, you have to get first downs, or that tempo, that speed tempo that you want to go could be a real quick 3 and out, and you're punting the ball having used no time on the clock. So you got to be really careful. But we absolutely make that part of the game plan every single week, and we hope we can effectively use it on Friday.
We saw some things in last week's game, just despite the outcome, despite how good Highland was, especially defensively. Saw some things offensively that were pretty nice. You talked about the catches by Cruz and Fox, and I thought Drake ran the ball well and ran the ball hard.
Yes.
Boston was consistent again, and you got Lucas in there for a couple plays at quarterback, and was able to do some things. It just gives you a different look, and again, it's one of those things where now you have more people who have been in key situations to be able to rely on them during the course of a game.
Yeah, we'll continue to do that. I think that's just who we are, and more guys getting involved. Brennan Fox, Peyton Barnett in our tight set, and we'll have Josh Schmid back this week, who was sick last week, and that'll be a nice guy to have back in the offense. Noah Mofield and Jake Welch continue to play good football for us. Dylan Cannell has done a good job in our tight set at our wingback spot. But the idea of Lucas is our second quarterback, but we try to get him in at least 2 series a game, just because we believe he brings some things to the table that are pretty explosive. He's a big play guy. He's got great speed. He's very elusive, throws the ball well. And so we like to see him in a series or 2. We got getting experience in big ball games if we ever need him. Heaven forbid we have an injury to Boston, or down the road, as a future quarterback here, maybe next year as our starter. It's good to see him get some experience on the field and get some snaps, and I think he's growing in confidence and feeling better about himself on the field, and that's a good weapon to have.
I thought the couple of times he threw the ball last week against Highland, he threw it a lot better than he had in the first 2 games.
Yeah, and I think that's going to continue to happen. I think just having him ready, I think he's actively involved. He's very engaged on the sideline to what's going on, listening to the call, staying in, like if I were in, what would I be thinking about? That's important because I feel like if we had to put him in at any time in the game, he'd be ready to go.
Have to ask this because we've had this situation several times, and you talked about a season where there's been a really strange game, and obviously last Friday was kind of strange, not from a standpoint of the way it was played, but we're up there in Highland where weren't for sure if the game was going to be at Highland, if it was going to be played Friday night.
Right.
There's heavy rain 5 miles away for the entire game that's being held back by a strong wind, and it didn't rain until right at the end of the game. And so, it was kind of one of those weird things where you kept expecting the skies to open up, and they never did.
It was. I mean, the forecast was not good. I mean, it just seemed like when you read the forecast, there was no way that game was going to be played. If nothing else, if not for the rain, just because of the chance of lightning in the surrounding area that would cause a 30-minute delay every time. And you're right. I mean, it's you look at a radar. I looked at the radar in the locker room after the game, and you look at the radar on my phone and you think, how did we play that game? I don't see a place where we could have been playing. It's just
in Highland.
It was just odd. You're right. We did get rained on late, but I mean, getting wet's not a big deal.
But you got that chance now with Cahokia because 2 years ago there were lightning delays. Last year it was delayed because of a possible riot. Now Cahokia comes back. It looks like weather-wise we're going to be in good shape though.
No way. Something. No, it's just it's funny. As I get towards the end of my coaching, and I think about this a lot. I think about early in my career, it seemed like you had a home game where you got on a bus, you played the game, and that's it. It seems like now there are just so many things on the periphery that more than ever. It's almost like a weekly thing. There's a new challenge. There's a new concern. There's a new worry. There's a new this. It's rare just to hop on a bus and go play a game or host a game, and the game happens, and it just seems like there's always something going on. But and it's not all bad. It's just always something happening and a challenge or a little piece of adversity you got to deal with. But we're looking forward to Friday. Can't wait to get back home and play.
And the one thing that is going to be consistent is that you're going to be home in front of the home crowd. There's going to be brats on the grill and the band's playing and popcorn in the concession stand and a lot of Marion Wildcats fan here to watch the Cat.
Yeah, there's nothing like it, man. We haven't played a Friday home game yet. We had a Saturday afternoon game week 1, so we're looking forward to that Friday night lights and hopefully the fans can give us a little mojo and a little magic and make this thing happen.
All right, that's Marion head football coach Kerry Martin. The Wildcats at home Friday night, South 7 Conference opener against Cahokia. For Dateline Marion, I'm Tim Petrowich.